Welcome, everybody. This is session 4 of the Omaha Project Healing Waters beginner fly tying class. Tonight we're going to be covering the Gold Ribbed Hares Ear. Last month, we had the pheasant tail nymph. And this is another nymph, but it's a little more of a buggy appearance, a little thicker of a body. And that leads it to represent a few other types of nymphs and other aquatic creatures. So the hook tonight is a nymph hook, any 2x long hook. We talked about hooks in I think the first session, but you don't want it to be too long, or you're stretching out the shape of the nymph and it's not really going to look natural. But a 2x long hook will let you have a decent sized thorax, the front part of the fly, and then the abdomen, the back part of the fly is long enough to represent the actual insects. This can be tied in lots of different sizes. And there's a lot of different variations that you can do with this fly, a lot of different materials you can use. But I'm going to show you the basic fly, and it's going to get a little bit into using natural fur for dubbing instead of synthetics. The thread can be anything you want it to be. Some people, if they weight a fly, they'll put like a red or orange, a certain color for the head. So they can identify which ones are weighted in their fly box. You can use tan to match the color of the main color of the fly, like it's shown in this picture. But you can also use standard black or brown thread. In larger sizes, you would use a 6/0 or a larger thread. If you're getting down into the size 18s, probably 16 and smaller, you're going to want to make sure you're using a thinner thread. And that just keeps you from causing too much bulk at the front. And that's probably the hardest part of this fly, is not crowding the eye of the hook too much to where the head is taking up part of the eye of the hook where you can't finish off the fly correctly. And so for the rest of it, I'm going to switch to my materials camera, and we're going to discuss some of these. I think that's focused pretty good. The fly is called a gold ribbed hare's ear, but the best way to really tie the fly is with several parts of this hare's mask, is what it's called. So it's the ears and the face, the cheeks. You can even see the whiskers on there. Some people have clipped those out so they're not in the way, especially if you're going to take this and cut all the hair off of it and mix your own dubbing blends. But for tonight, we'll just show you how to use that. You could also use other types of dubbing. Does that show up correctly? That's not reversed for you, is it?
It looks straight.
Okay, good. This is an example. This is BT's Touchatron dubbing. Pretty similar color. It's a golden, light golden brown. You can use synthetic. You can use any dubbing for a gold ribbed hare's ear, but you want the color to kind of match the color of the natural nymphs. And so I wanted to cover, since we're not doing an in-person class, I wanted to cover a little bit on some dubbing techniques. And I think that'll kind of help make this session kind of make a little bit more sense. So let me switch back to the Vice camera. So this is actually a size 12 hook. And I'm doing that just so it's a little bit better picture for the camera. And first, I'm just going to cover a few dubbing techniques, so I'll probably just waste this hook. So the first thing I'm going to do is start my thread on, and it's not critical, the actual starting point of the thread, at least for the way I'm doing this tonight. But you want to try to keep yourself honest by starting the thread at least an eye's length back from the eye of the hook. So with dubbing, whether you're using synthetic or natural furs, there's, let me show you an example of, this is super fine dubbing. It comes, I bought it in a, let me try to zoom in on that. There we go. Comes in a box like this. On the other side is holes where you can pull the dubbing through. This type of dubbing is, again, it's synthetic. I don't know what material that's made out of, but it is waterproof, and it's very, very fine and very long fibers. So if I wanted to put dubbing on this thread, the key, just talking basic.
Focus, Mike. Focus.
Okay, sorry. The key to just basic dubbing is you want to use a very little amount of dubbing. I use Bob Ross, the painter. He always talks about 3 hairs and some air. You just want just a little bit of dubbing and twist it onto the thread. And when you do that, you're covering up the thread with those small fibers. And when you do that, when you twist that onto the thread, then you start to wrap it, you get a fuzzy body that's in the color of that dubbing. That's the whole concept behind dubbing. And if it starts to get loose like that, you can tighten it up again and create a dubbed body like that. There's a lot of ways of making it easier. I'm going to try to clean all this off. And that was just basically taking very fine dubbing and wrapping it onto the thread, just dry. Again, you know, a lot of people will pull a big clump of dubbing out of there and try to wrap it on there. And I'll just kind of do an example with this black. You take too much and you try to twist it on there, you just get this big clump like that, and it won't really stick to the thread that well, and it just causes the body to be real fat. Everything gets in the way. The best thing to do is just to take that same clump and just tease out a few fibers, just a little bit like that, and just twist it onto the thread. You can always add a few more of those little fibers to make it thicker. And you can always, like, I can wrap the body like that. And if I want it to be thicker, I could just go over it again with thin amounts of dubbing, and then just go over that same spot and make it thicker. So the main point there is just to 3 hairs and some air. Just use very little dubbing. Most people that have trouble with dubbing is because they're using too much. Kelly Gallup says if you take your dubbing, I'm going to go up above my, let me zoom out a little bit here if I can. If you take your dubbing and drop it, if it drops pretty quick like that did, that's too much. You want to take a little bit away. You want it to kind of just float, just kind of back and forth like that, real slow to drop. I don't know if you saw that dubbing drop. So another way to do dubbing is to use a product called dubbing wax. And there's BT's dubbing wax comes in tacky and extra, is it super tacky? You apply the wax to the thread. You don't want a bunch of clumps, but you just touch the wax to the thread. And that makes the thread sticky. So then you can take, whether it's a natural dubbing or this is a synthetic dubbing, and just touch it to the thread. And the concept is that really that's as much dubbing as that thread really should have on it anyway. So then you just take it and twist it like that. And that wax will kind of help make that into a nice rope. And then you dub that onto your, you wrap that onto your body. Another way, I can strip all this off without making too much of a mess. And you can do this with or without wax, is to do a dubbing loop. So we'll do it with wax. Basically the same process, and the reason I'm doing that is since we just did that with wax, we'll do the same process again. It's basically touch the dubbing onto there, onto the thread. And then you can use a tool, you can use a hackle pliers, you can use an actual dubbing twister. But if you grab that thread and then wrap over it a couple of times, you have like a loop of thread with the dubbing in it. And then if you twist that, then you've got those two threads that have the dubbing twisted between them. Now you can see it's kind of like a rope. You can pull out the excess. And so when you wrap that, excuse me, bumping the camera, when you wrap that on the hook, you can get a more buggy, you know, shaggy kind of a appearance of the dubbing there. Let's see where we're at here. All right. And hopefully if I untwist that, I'll be able to reuse this one more time. Tell you what I'm going to do is just tie this thread off so I can just cut it away to make my other point. Now, if you're using a thicker thread, I'll actually put on this red thread because it's pretty thick and it'll show my point a little better. All right. So this is actually 140 denier thread. It's relatively thick. This is um, a lot of the threads that you get are flat. Um, they're like a floss or silk. They're several strands that are just basically twisted together. So let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. If you take that thread and just flatten it out, you can split it like this with your needle, and you can actually put dubbing inside that and do that just like a dubbing loop. So I can um, take some of that beautiful dubbing, that Touchatron light golden dubbing, place some in between those threads, and then just spin your bobbin, twist that up. And then that's another way of making it. It's almost like a chenille, where then you can take that and wrap that for your body. So that's kind of a quick and dirty on different types of dubbing. Um, so for the hare's mask, let me go back to materials. So again, with a dubbing like this, you've got everything mixed. You've got a few different colors with some flash and everything, and it's just like a really nice mix. But if you want to use natural, the best way to get some dubbing to use for this type of a fly is to basically pinch little clumps of dubbing from different parts of the mask. Again, this is called a hare's ear, but it's best to use some hair from, you just basically pinch maybe some of this dark, some up here on the ears that's real spiky and short. Come over here in the cheeks to get some of this longer, lighter colored stuff. Just kind of go a lot of different parts of that mask. And then what I have here in my fingers is almost the right amount. I'm just basically going all around this mask, back up into the ears a little bit. And so you end up with long hairs, short hairs, darker, spiky hairs like that. And that's what we'll use for the dubbing, at least for the first part. So I will start my thread, and then I'll go back to the mask. So off camera here, I'm just going to start my thread on the hook. An eye length back from the eye, and I'm going to wrap it back to the bend of the hook. We've done that in all of our previous flies.
So maybe you want to switch the camera, Mike, or
so I wanted to go back to this now. So for the tail of the fly is the first thing we're going to tie in. And so you can use different feather fibers, you can use different hair, but the original and my favorite way to do this is to actually grab some of the longest hair that has good markings on it. So on this particular mask, the way it's kind of bent around, if I come up right in here, like right above the eye, there's a lot of hair up in here that's about the right length. So I'm just going to reach in there with my tips of my scissors, try not to go too deep. And if you can kind of grab a little clump, that'll kind of help keep from wasting too much material. So I'll grab a little clump like that, and then I'll switch cameras here. All right, now, if you look at what I have here, I've got all those tips and some long guard hairs. I'm going to take, this is quite a bit more than what I need for the tail. If you look at the base of it, I've got a whole lot of fuzz there. So I'm going to take this longer stuff and just pull it away. And then I'm going to just grab it by those tips. And I'm going to pull all that under fur, all the fuzz out like that. And I'm going to add that to my dubbing pile. Then I'm going to take another look at it, take a few more of those long things, grab it by the very, very tips, pull again. I got a little bit more. There's kind of some spikier stuff in there a little bit. That goes in my dubbing pile too. So what I'm left with for the most part here is just some guard hairs. So the guard hairs are those longer hairs, and then the under fur is basically part of what we're using for our dubbing. So we're going to take this clump of tail fibers here and hold it up to the eye of the hook. With my thumbnail, I'm measuring. I want this tail to extend the length of the shank. So from the back of the eye to the bend of the hook is the shank length. So that's how long I want that to be. I'm going to hold that up, measure it with my thumb, and then I'm going to come over with this hand and grab it in that same spot. Now when I tie that down, I'll have that measured properly. I'll take it, turn, another turn, do one more, and then I'll let go and take a look at it. And that looks good. So I'm going to come forward and just tie down the butt ends of those guard hairs. So now my tail is tied in. Now this is a Gold Ribbed Hares Ear, is the name of it. And let me grab off camera here I'll just show it to you. It's oval gold tinsel. And grab this is Danville's size 1618 is what it's called. It's a oval mylar tinsel. And I'm going to tie that in. And let the thread torque, if you notice, I'm not going to try to hold that on top of the hook shank or towards me. I want that thread torque to kind of take it around to the back of the fly. And the reason for that is when I start to wrap this ribbing, I don't want it to mess with the tail. So if I had this, I'm going to do it the wrong way first. It'll be on this side. If I have the ribbing starting here on this side, when I start to wrap forward, it's going to take my tail and twist it around. It's going to twist it around or push it down and twist it around to the back of the fly. So I want this to actually, I want this ribbing to end up on the far side of the hook from me. And the thread torque will take that around to the back. So that's where I want it to be. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to move my thread back to the point of the hook. And the reason is I'm not going to be able to get my dubbing right up to the end of the thread. So this will give me a little bit of room. I'll show you when I get to that point. So I've got my my dubbing that I picked off of the hare's mask and the ears and everything. And then the under fur that I used from the guard hairs that I picked for the tail. I've got all that stuff in my hands. So I'm just going to take it and just kind of mix it a little bit by pulling on it in my fingers like this. And then I'm just going to take a few of those fibers out and twist. Take a few more. So I'm holding it in my right hand. With my left hand, I'm just grabbing a few hairs and twisting them on. And if I think it's a little bit thin right there, I'll grab a few hairs and twist them right over the top of that. Now I've got about probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches of dubbing there. And so I'll start back toward the end of my thread there, right toward the bend of the hook. And now my dubbing has started there. So I can start wrapping my body forward. Okay, and now I've run out of dubbing. So I'll just extend my thread a little bit, grab my dubbing in my right hand again, take 3 hairs and some air, twist them on there. A few more. I've got kind of a light spot there in the middle, so I'll twist some in there. That's too big of a clump, so I'll just take that off. I'll do about another inch, 1.5 inches dubbing noodle. Okay. And then I'll continue wrapping forward here. Now, I'm going to wrap a little bit farther forward than what I think I'm going to need for my thorax. We look at the, let me grab the original that I showed you. You've got between 2/3 and a half is the wing case and the thorax of the fly. So I've gone a little bit farther than what I expect that to be. So now I'm going to take my ribbing here. And as I wrap it around the back, you'll see the tail didn't move at all. We'll do one good turn at the tail and then start up onto my abdomen and do spaced wraps. As long as you've got about 3 or 4, that'll be fine. I'm going to take a couple extra wraps up into where my thorax will be covering it up and just tie that tinsel down. And then I'll cut it toward the back of my scissors. Tinsel is, it's not necessarily metallic, but it will dull your tips of your scissors. So it's always best to cut materials like that toward the back of your scissors, just so it keeps them nice and sharp. So that's the back end of the fly. But I want my thorax actually to be a little bit further up. So if we look at the, sorry about that, if we look at the overall length of the body here, about half the body, which turns out to be like about 1/3 of the total fly. So right about in here, I want my thorax to be. So I move my thread to that point and let it hang. So now for the wing case, I'm going to use some kind of pretty stuff. It's a turkey feather. I like this mottled brown stuff like this. I'm going to take about 9 or 5 of these barbs. Now you've got like a pretty side here, a darker color, and then you've got a dull side. I'm going to take the dull side facing up and put that on the side of the hook facing me. And then I'm going to wrap the thread around that and tie those down. And that's going to be pulled forward to be my wing case. Now, as I pull that forward, I see I didn't quite go back far enough. I probably want to go a little bit further back. So I can come back here, a couple more turns, and just make a little bit wider of a thorax area. So now when I fold that forward, that looks like that's going to be right. So I'll just let that reach out toward the back. And now we basically want to do the same thing for the thorax. Grab that same clump of dubbing and grab a few hairs, twist them on. I have a thin spot right there in the middle. I'll put a few more on. Grab a few more. Sometimes you have to mix it a little bit more because I had some real light colored stuff that was in a clump there. And you want those darker guard hairs all mixed in with that so they'll all stick out and kind of represent the legs. I'm going to come back to where my wing case is, and I'm going to go a little bit thicker on this thorax. The thorax of any nymph or pupa, just that front part of the fly is usually fatter. So need a little bit more dubbing here. That should be enough. Now, if you
look
notice,
like an ice cream cone, right?
pardon me? Like an ice cream?
When I say it looks like an ice cream cone, you got this cone and then the ice cream
Right.
is the thorax.
Right. So the thorax is, like he's saying, kind of more bulbous, a little bit more like that's the ice cream, and the cone is the back part. So I'm just going to put a little bit more on there, and then you'll notice I have about an eye length back of bare hook there, right here in the front, and I'm going to need that to tie down my wing case. So I'm going to fold this wing case forward. And then I want it a little bit towards me. If you look at it from, turn my vise so you can see it. I want to go a little bit towards me because the thread torque is going to pull that around to the other side. So now my wing case is centered on the top of the fly there. And then I'll take a couple wraps forward, a couple over top. And then at this point, I like to go ahead and finish off the fly. So if you don't have a whip finish tool, you can do a half hitch and then a double half hitch, maybe another double half hitch. And that's about as good as whip finishing. If you do have a whip finisher, make your triangle and then wrap the head from the back toward the front and then pull it nice and tight. And to pull that tight, I have actually broken a hook before when I was first tying. You can stick the end of I learned this on one of Al's guests. And stick the end of your whip finisher in the eye of the hook. Give you some traction there. And then cut that. And then cut the wing case. And then I could probably save that wing case, save that turkey for another fly. Now you'll notice there's a lot of little guard hairs sticking out. some of them may be a little bit too long, but really there's no such thing. You could take, on my bodkin here, I have a little piece of Velcro. You could kind of tease out a little bit with the Velcro. You could also just take your dubbing needle and pick at it a little bit. Pick a few of those guard hairs out. And then there's also a dubbing brush like this, so you can, it's a little stiffer of a brush than what that Velcro is. Just pick some of that out. And that'll represent legs. And then it's always a good idea to put a little bit of head cement, especially when you're first tying and your heads of your flies might not be too tight. Take a little drop of head cement on your bodkin and touch that to the head of the fly. And that's a gold ribbed hare's ear. Just to make sure you don't get any glue in the eye of your fly, because nothing's more frustrating than trying to tie a fly on at the stream and you have glue in the eye. You can take an old hackle tip and just run it through there like that, and it'll clean all the glue out. And that's a gold ribbed hare's ear. It looks a little messy. It looks a little messy, but that's the point. You want the tail to flow a little bit. You want the legs to stick out as, those guard hairs to stick out as legs.
Looks good.
And if you ask any guide or most fishermen, if you ever look up on the internet and say what are the top 10 flies in anybody's box, it's normally a hare's ear is going to fall in that top 10, along with the pheasant.
I've used that fly all over the country to great success. When I first started fly fishing, that was the only fly I used. In fact, I caught browns in New York and Colorado and Washington and all over the country with that fly. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, I stopped using it. I don't know why.
I don't, I'll tie on a pheasant tail. I'll try it if I want to use nymphs. If that doesn't work, I know a gold ribbed hare's ear will probably work. And the key to this fly to me is you can go a little bigger than this is a size 12. You can go into size 10, a size 8, and actually use it for a lighter stonefly nymph. But because of the lighter color and the bulkier body, this could, they go through tumbling through the stream as you're fishing them. This could represent a scud. This could represent a caddis pupa. Could represent a lot of different underwater insects. If you really tie it in a larger size, it could be a small minnow. If you just imagine the shape of a minnow, it could be a small bait fish or a small fry. A lot of trout eat their own. The origin, real quick, is not really fully known. The first one is believed to have been tied in England in the early 1900s as a variant of the hare's ear wet fly. The hare's ear wet fly had a gray mallard wing swept back. There was also a hare's ear dry fly. So they, in England, they used hare's masks, hare's ear as dubbing on several different flies. A lot of variations to this fly, like I said before, pretty popular nowadays with a bead on the front. A lot of people use squirrel or other materials. Squirrel is very similar to what you get off a hare's mask. The hares, I have that down where I can't really reach. The the hairs on a, like a fox squirrel, even a gray squirrel, pine squirrel, the guard hairs are really barred, really good markings on them, but it does have soft underfur. Tying it in squirrel, you'd probably be a little more on the gray side unless it's a squirrel blend. Like I said, it's very similar to the pheasant tail we learned in the last class, but it's a fuller, buggier profile. So